Section 38 of Library Essays, Papers Related to the Work of Public Libraries. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Betty B. Library Essays, Papers Related to the Work of Public Libraries by Arthur Elmore Bostwick. The Library as a Museum, Part 1. Boundary regions are always interesting. Close to the line separating two regions of fact or of thought cluster the examples that fascinate us. Kipling's stories of India are so interesting because they tell of the meeting points of two civilizations, the boundary along which they come into contact, interact, and fuse. The same is true of all tales of the white man and the red Indian, of the stories of early explorers, of the narratives of Spanish conquistadors in the South and French Jesuits in the North. The student of mathematical physics will tell you that it is not in homogeneous regions, but along boundary lines that the application of his equations becomes difficult, and at the same time interesting. Our whole human life is conditioned by boundaries. It is possible only on a surface separating the Earth's mass from its atmosphere. It is limited by narrow conditions of temperature, nourishment, light, and so on. So we need not be astonished when we find that two related subjects of any kind acquire new vitality and new interest when we study the region along the line where they touch. This is especially true of the library and the museum. I do not intend to dwell on the case where the books in a library are themselves treated as museum objects, although possibly this is the one that may first occur to the mind in this connection. Books that are curiosities on account of their rarity or for other reasons are limited usually to very large libraries. The Lenox Library in New York, now part of the Public Library, was almost entirely a book museum and was so intended by its founder. The private libraries of great collectors, such as J. Pierpont Morgan or the Huntingtons, are often largely book museums, and in general a book that brings a high price brings it for its value as a curiosity, not as a book. The freer a book is, the more value it has as a book. The more restricted it is, the greater its value as a curiosity. Of course, even a small library may have one or two books that are worth display as curiosities because they are old or rare or have interesting local associations, either through the author or the owner or in some other way. The Hawthorne and Longfellow room in the Bowdoin College Library is an example of this latter case. But a book, or anything else, owned and displayed as a mere curiosity, is not of much real value, no matter what price it may bring at auction. The things that make a good museum what it is are not curiosities at all, in the vulgar sense. They illustrate some science or art and make its study easier and more interesting. They throw light on geology or history or sculpture. Once in a while we see a museum collection of books made for this object, to illustrate the art of binding or the history of printing or the depredations of book-eating insects. The value of specimens like these has nothing to do with their rarity. Sometimes the smallest library may have books or pamphlets that may be displayed with this object, especially where the subject is local. It may, for instance, gather a collection of early pamphlets from local printing offices or of books once the property of some eminent citizen. These things belong to a museum pure and simple, which is the reason why I am mentioning them at first, to get them out of the way before treating my real subject, which is the debatable ground between library and museum. There is nothing debatable about a book museum, any more than about any other kind of museum. A collection of historical or geological specimens, for instance, that often finds place in a library building, not because it is a library, but because it is a convenient place, or because it has been thought best to build a library and a museum under one roof, as has been done in Pittsburgh. There is, however, a real debatable ground between library and museum, with somewhat hazy boundaries, which I believe that either is justified in overstepping whenever such an act supplies an omission and does not duplicate. In other words, there is a boundary region between library and museum that may be occupied by either, but should not be occupied by both. I shall try briefly to define this region and indicate how the library may occupy parts of it without legitimate criticism when the necessity arises. Descriptive and illustrative material is to be found in both library and museum. Speaking generally, the former is of primary importance in the library and the latter in the museum. Many books consist of descriptive text alone, without pictures or diagrams, and on the other hand, a museum might contain specimens without labels, although they would not be of much use. In general, text with illustrations belongs in a library, and specimens with labels in a museum. The mere statement of the distinction as it has just been given, however, shows that it may be very difficult to draw a line between the two kinds of collections. A museum has been defined as a collection of good labels accompanied by illustrative specimens. Here the value of the descriptive text is emphasized, even in the museum collection. When descriptive treatises are shelved in connection with the specimens, as in some modern museums, we have an expansion of the label into the book, and the museum, in this one particular at least, crosses the dividing line between it and the library. No one would blame it for so doing. Similarly, the library may occasionally cross the line in the other direction without incurring blame. Let me repeat that both library and museum may contain descriptive and explanatory text and illustrative material. In the museum, the text is usually in the form of labels attached to the specimens, and these are generally material objects. In the library, the text is in book form, and the specimens, if we may so call them, are plates bound into the book. The first step taken by the library toward the line that separates it from the museum is when the plates, instead of being bound into a book, are kept separately in a portfolio. The accompanying text, corresponding to the labels of museum collections, may be on the same sheet as the plates, often on the reverse side or on separate sheets, which may be bound into a book even when the plates are separate. In the St. Louis Public Library, about 1,000 volumes, forming 1/3 of the collection kept regularly in our art room, have separate plates. These are of course not usually on display, but are in the cases ready to be used in the room on demand. They thus correspond, not with museum material displayed in cases, but with specimens packed away in such manner that they may easily be secured for study by those who want them. One may imagine a whole museum equipped for students in this way, with nothing on display at all, no popular exhibition features. Probably no museum was ever so administered as an entirety, and as you know, the large museums are making more and more of features adding to the attractiveness of the collection as a popular spectacle. The public visits the Museum of Natural History in New York much as it turns the pages of the National Geographic magazine, just to look at the pictures. This treatment of material is justified because it increases popular interest in the subject matter and brings people to the museum who would not otherwise enter it. Also, it predisposes public bodies to more generous support of the museum. This is true again of such institutions as botanical and zoological gardens, which have always been show places for the public as well as laboratories for the student. The library cannot afford to neglect such an opportunity of attracting the public and of stimulating interest in its own subject matter, books. It cannot continuously display any great part of its separate prints, as a museum does with its specimens, but it can exhibit them from time to time, so that one or another of them is always displayed in this way. Simple screens can be cheaply made and the prints fastened thereto with thumb pins, taking care not to injure them by perforating with the pin, but letting the edge of the head lap over the edge of the print to hold it, and using sheets of transparent celluloid for protection where necessary. After beginning such displays in our own library, we found them so popular with our readers and so helpful in our own work that we are now holding 30 or 40 yearly, sometimes 2 or 3 at once in different parts of the library, supplementing our own material with loans from interested friends. The value of exhibitions of plates is so highly estimated by some librarians that they are breaking up valuable volumes so that the plates may be used separately. This is a second step toward the museum use of the library. I have heard a well-known librarian assert that if permitted by his board, he would dismember every art book in his library in this way. Most of us, especially if we are interested in the exhibition side of library work, which is distinctly a museum side, will be inclined to sympathize with him. But although we hesitate perhaps to tear to pieces good books, even for such a good purpose as this, there is much material that can be so treated with a clear conscience. Many duplicates of artworks can be thus used, and there is hardly an illustrated book which, when the librarian is ready to throw it away, does not contain plates or maps which can be saved and used. In St. Louis, when we condemn books, they are never destroyed, and consigned to the old paper dealer before passing through the hands and before the eyes of all those who might use still usable fragments of this kind. Taking the item of maps alone, some of the best special maps are attached to volumes of travel or history, as folders or in pockets. So long as the book is usable, the map of course must go with it. But if the map has been reinforced with linen when the book is purchased, as it ought to be, it will probably be in usable condition when the book is worn out, and may at once be transferred to the map collection. The same is true of other plate than pictures. Facsimiles of handwriting, for instance. A very fair autograph collection may be made of such detached plates. Not originals, of course, but originals are valuable merely as curiosities, in the way that we have already noted. Facsimiles are as good for any other purpose. Of course, all such torn up or detached material is very convenient also for referencing use. Easily filed and quickly consulted. It may be kept in vertical file cases, in loose leaf binders, or in ordinary portfolios. One of the interesting things about it is the facility of assembling it in different ways. In our own library we sometimes tear apart the leaves of an art book simply to group the plates in an order that will make them more valuable for reference purposes. This leads us to another nearly related, though I should call it a still further, step toward the museum region, which is taken when we deliberately create specimens by clipping and mounting. Most libraries are now doing this freely, both for reference work and for circulation. In many cases there are no separate labels here, except a brief descriptive title, the material being classified according to its subject or its intended use. The similarity to the school museum or circulating museum, a very recent development of museum work, is striking. In this field the library has been ahead of the regular museums. The material clipped and mounted is usually book material, largely plates from books, magazines, or papers. There is much other material that can be so mounted and used, the kind of thing that is familiar in memorabilia scrapbooks, theater and concert programs, announcements, invitations, tickets of admission, badges, menus, photographs, advertising material, etc. It is usually a mistake to make permanent scrapbooks of such material. When they need to be assembled in book form, the separate mounts can be brought together in a loose leaf binder. A permanent scrapbook ties the material together in a way that may prove embarrassing. Suppose, for instance, that you are keeping printed material from 3 clubs in your town, as you ought. Clubs seldom do this for themselves. Several St. Louis women's clubs have told us that they visit the library when they want to indulge in research into their own past doings. It might be natural to keep a scrapbook for each club and insert the material as it comes. But suppose you desire to display all your material on war activities, and that some of the material in these scrapbooks falls under this head. You will have to leave it out or tear out your scrapbook leaves. Mounting takes time, and it is not necessary to mount everything. Material used only occasionally may be left unmounted. For instance, much newspaper clipped material may be kept loosely in heavy manila envelopes. Again, some material may be made more accessible if not mounted, especially if in card form, and in standard sizes. Such is the postal card. The amount of valuable material obtainable in postal card form will astonish those who have not looked into the matter. Besides the usual views of localities, embracing buildings, monuments, and scenery, good collections of sculpture, architecture, portraits, and many other things may be made in postal card form. Postal cards are all of the same size and very compact, so that they may be filed in trays and treated very much like catalog cards, guides being used with them as in an ordinary catalog. The amount of usable material that can be stored to the square foot in this form is probably greater than any other. End of section 38.